everyone, it's Jenny at JC Cards, and today I've got another card for the Hedgehog Hollow. This week it is featuring the October 2019 subscription box, and I'm going to be creating this moonlit Christmas card scene. But before I do, I just wanted to show you the October 2019 box. If you're not interested in what's in here, you can skip across to, I think it's about the 2-minute mark, where I'll start showing you the card I'm making today. As always, in the box you get an illustrated card which shows you on the back everything that's in this month's box, as well as the value of the box and a little message from Alex at the Hedgehog Hollow. You also get these card shop cards and envelopes. They've got a nice scalloped edge and they're sort of a cream or ivory colour. You get some Christmas themed candy and these brads, which are super useful for using with the die that's in the box. You also get these 4 A2 size, that's 4 1/4 by 5.5 panels of cardstock in a gorgeous purple and plum red, navy and a kind of Christmas foil red colour. And then we get 3 stamp sets. So you've got this one which has 2 little fun snow guys, some tree scenes, some kind of wind shapes. There's this one that has a few silhouettes on it, which I'm going to be using on my card today, as well as a Santa Claus, some gift wrapped presents and some other little images, and then a sentiment set, some of which are larger sentiments to go inside a card as well, which I'll show you. And then this is the die I mentioned. It's a 5-step die. It's quite complicated, but actually when you know how to do it, it's quite straightforward. And there is a video, I believe, over on the Hedgehog Hollow channel that shows you how to use that die. I'm not going to be using it in my card today. And then for regular subscribers, there is this stencil which has snowflakes, a deer, a present and a tree, as well as some card bases. So to start off with, I'm going to be using this navy panel of cardstock and I'm going to be doing some ink blending. I want to create a night sky. I'm using 3 colours of Distress Oxide ink and a Distress ink. So I'm using tumbled glass, broken china, faded jeans, and then black soot as the Distress ink. And I'm using my blender brushes to blend from tumbled glass into broken china into faded jeans on this navy cardstock. So the genius thing about Distress Oxides is that they're opaque, so you can use them over darker coloured cardstock like I'm doing here, and it will completely cover it over. So I thought that the navy panel was a really good base for a night sky, and it really kind of worked with these colours of blue that I'm using. And I'm just using my blender brush just to go over the panel. Now, before I'll dry it with my heat tool, I want to add some splatters. So I want to add some stars. I'm using a bit of acrylic paint mixed with a tiny bit of water. This is Paper Artsy Snowflake chalk paint. And I'm going to gently flick on some splatters and you'll see, whoops, totally messed it up, but I didn't want to ink blend my panel again. So I'll just carry on regardless, and you'll see that actually in the end it doesn't really matter too much. It worked out. So I'll speed this up a little bit here so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm getting lots of flicks, some larger, some smaller, a couple of bigger ones. I did try and dab it off, it made it worse. So what I'm going to do is go in with some water, and that will react with the Distress Oxides and give a few more kind of paler stars, almost as if they're in the background. I'll then dry it with my heat gun. I'm using this on setting 1 for those of you who've got the Wow Dual Heat gun. And I'll do that a couple more times. I'm now going to use this Ultra New Antique Silver spray it onto my craft mat, and then flick it on with the same paintbrush that I have cleaned. And that's just going to add a little bit of subtle shimmer. It's antique silver, so it's kind of a darker silver. And then I'll repeat that again a couple more times and dry it with my heat tool in between. Get the panel good and dry. If in case you're wondering, my splatter box is an old Hedgehog Hollow subscription box. So you can keep those, they're really useful for this. Now I'm going to be stamping my first silhouette. So I'm using the mini Misty here, but you'll see I change it up to the larger Misty later on. And I'm stamping first off this, so it's hanging off the edge of my panel, and I'm going to stamp it in some Midnight ink by Catherine Pooler, which is a very dark black ink, and it's great, it's very opaque, it goes over things like chalk. paint or Distress Oxides. And I did stamp it a couple of times, but you'll see first impression, it's a really super dark black. I do find with some other black inks, you have to stamp them 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 times. And I really don't like stays on ink. So that might have been a good one for this as well. See, I moved to my larger Misty here because I'm going to have too much of my stamp after I've moved it hanging off the end for the mini Misty. And I'm just stamping those rows of trees again, having inked up the stamp, and I'll do it a couple more times. Now you'll see I haven't re-inked my stamp. I'm going to leave that ink on the panel, on the stamp, and then stamp it again. I've moved my panel and I'm just going to use some of that ink that's left over there. And you'll get a slightly lighter impression. I'll move it up one more time and stamp it again. I'm not re-inking it. And I'm doing this because that way the lighter stamping will look like it's in the background, almost like some rolling hills in the background of a moonlit sky. So I want this scene to have Santa's reindeer coming in from the top right, and obviously they're magical reindeer. There's always a trail of stars behind them, and I love the trail of stars that's included in the stamp set. So I'm going to heat emboss it. I've added lots and lots of my powder tool to the panel because that's highly recommended for any time you're going to heat emboss on an ink blended panel. And then I'm going to ink it up with my WOW embossing ink, which is a clear sticky ink used for embossing. And then I'm going to emboss it with gold metallic sparkle embossing powder, which is a gorgeous kind of opaque gold with lots of glittery gold glitter in it. I did get a little bit sticky where I didn't want it to be, so I used a small paintbrush just to brush that off. It's a dry brush that I only use for this purpose, and then I'll heat it up with my heat tool. I'm then going to take the reindeer silhouette and add them just in front of those magical sparkles. I won't tell you what my husband said when I showed him this card. I think it's very pretty, and it reminds me of Santa Claus the movie. Do you remember that? With the reindeer, and they kind of came in with all the sparkles under their feet. I remember it. I used to love it when I was a kid. Anyway, so I'm inking up the reindeer with Distress Oxide again because it's opaque. It'll cover over the night sky. So that first layer I stamped twice, and I stamped it with Walnut Stain Distress Oxide. And then I'm going to come in, just add a tiny bit of dimension, which is quite hard to see in the video itself. But I'm going to use a mini ink dauber and add some ground espresso oxide just at the bottom underneath each of the reindeer, and then stamp it a couple more times again. Now for the final stamp, I'm going to be using the moon, which is actually quite easy to miss on that stamp set, but it is there. And I'm going to stamp it in some white pigment ink. I like the Simon Says Stamp white pigment ink, get a good coverage. I could have heat embossed this with white embossing powder for a whiter image, but I actually wanted this to be slightly faded back because I wanted the real stars of the show to be the reindeer. And I like the way that the moon kind of has a little bit more texture with the stars kind of showing through it. And then I'm going to heat that up with my heat tool just to make sure it doesn't smudge. Now for my sentiment, I'm going to use Be Full of Light, which I thought went really well with this scene. I'm going to stamp it in WOW embossing ink again, and then heat emboss it in opaque bright white super fine embossing powder. And I'm using just a scrap of black cardstock that I've cut in a strip, and I did treat it with my powder tool before I did my heat embossing. And before I add that to the front of my panel, I'm gonna fold my card base. I like to score it at 4 1/4, fold it, and then use my Teflon bone folder just to get a really good crease. And the reason I'm showing this portion in my video is I wanted to show you one of the larger sentiments from the stamp set in this month's box, because they are great for using inside the cards. There's a couple that are this big, and I think sometimes we do neglect the inside of our cards, and I just really wanted to show you guys that sometimes I do add sentiments to the inside. So you can see I've popped it on the front there with some double-sided adhesive, and then I've trimmed out my sentiment strip, popped it up onto some 3M foam tape, and then I'll add it to the front of my card. And I'll give you a quick close-up of it. You can see that initial accidental blob, you can still see it, but it kind of faded in, dried back a little bit, so I'm going to call it a galaxy, not a mistake. Anyway, that finishes my card for today. I hope you've enjoyed. If you did, here's another couple of videos you might like to check out, and maybe think about subscribing to my channel. Hit that bell to be reminded when I have a new video. Have an awesome day. Thanks for watching. Bye.